everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Ana Cavalcante, and I'm a student assistant with the Bob Graham Center for Public Service and your host for this program in partnership with our friends in the Beyond 120 program. Before we kick this off, I just want to go over tonight's agenda and some quick Zoom housekeeping. We will first hear from our panelists and then go into question and answer. I would like to ask that we all keep our mics muted unless speaking, and to use either the chat feature or the raise your hand function to ask questions. Feel free to send your questions to the general chat or directly to me if you would like to speak. Just activate the raise hand function and I'll call on you and you can ask your question. We will be recording the session and it will be sent out and posted on the Graham Center website. And without further ado, we are pleased to host two Gator grads to speak with us about their careers in international public service. Our panel includes Anya Prusa, UF class of 2009. She is a Slater Family Fellow and Senior Associate at the Brazil Institute in the Wilson Center. And Mia Arnold, UF class of 2018, Senior Associate at the United Nations Foundation. Please join me in giving a virtual welcome to both Anya and Mia, and the floor is yours. So Anya will go first.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Anna, for the introduction. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you today, and I'm looking forward to your questions as well. I am going to give you just kind of a brief overview of, what my career looked like since leaving UF, but more than happy to dig in on any specific questions you might have about the roles that I've been in or, the transitions that I've made. I'm also now in a position where I do hire lots of interns as well as junior staff for the Brazil Institute. So happy to answer questions as well about the hiring process and what I look for in terms of resumes and interviews as well. So as Anna noted, I graduated from UF in 2009. I actually started UF as a physics and history major, which people always think it's an odd combination, but I really just wanted to learn how the world worked. That was my interest. I just wanted to understand things. And so, history teaches you a lot about that, and physics teaches you a lot about that as well. But, I didn't really want to be like a historian of science, which to me seemed the only way to combine those two interests. So in my junior year at UF, I did ultimately choose to kind of focus on the history side. I picked up a second major in political science as well. And I just really loved, doing the research and writing and interacting with people. I had the opportunity to travel abroad while I was at UF, and I think that was a really big part of my decision to go into international affairs because there was always something new, right? It's a field that is ever changing. There's always new developments. And so I think it's a place where you can constantly learn and grow. And that was really appealing to me. So after I left UF, I actually went straight into grad school, and I ended up in the end getting 2 graduate degrees. One was more academic. I got a master's in Latin American studies here in DC. And then the second was more professional. I got a master's in public policy. So again, if you have any questions about those 2 degrees and why I ended up getting one and then going back for the other, I'm happy to talk through that as well. But really, throughout my career, I've been, very focused again on just kind of understanding the world around me and trying to, I think, build up the experience that would allow me to do that and to be more credible as well as an expert in my field. So while I was, getting my first graduate degree in Latin American studies, I was living in DC, and I got the opportunity to intern at the State Department and see how, public policy is actually implemented, how foreign policy gets done, which was incredibly fascinating. I got hired on as a civil service employee and stayed in that position for about a year. But when I graduated with my first master's, I really felt like I didn't yet know what I wanted to do. I needed more time to kind of explore and figure it out. So I actually moved to Brazil and spent 2 years in Brazil studying Portuguese. And I had a research position at the Fundação Getúlio Vargas, which is a Brazilian think tank. And I also volunteered with an organization, Saúde Criança, which helps lower income Brazilians get access to healthcare. Healthcare in Brazil is free for all. It's written into the Constitution, but it can still be hard to access that system and to navigate it. And so that, I think, really, it was a leap in the dark. It was a risk, to quit my job to move to Brazil and try to start something new. But it was foundational for me because it gave me the credibility to then come back to the US and position myself as someone who knew what she was talking about when it came to Brazil. And so there were moments in Brazil where I was applying for jobs. I was trying to come back to the United States, and it was really hard. I ended up having to just move back to the US without a job in hand and, kind of start over and rebuild my network in DC. But looking back, it was definitely the right move. And so I think that would be, one takeaway for all of you, is that sometimes you do just have to take a leap and it might not go the way you think. But when you're looking back, and I've, now been graduated for like 12 years, it's gone by so fast. Like when you look back at your career, you'll see that it makes sense, right? You'll see the connections and how each job led to the next, how each opportunity sets you up for the next one. I think when you're looking ahead, it can be really hard to try to map it out. But I promise you, it will make sense in hindsight. So, I've kind of in my career, I've jumped from, government. I have some experience in the private sector doing strategic consulting. And now I am at the Wilson Center, which is a public policy think tank. So we do a lot of work promoting research, hosting events, and really trying to build connections between Brazil and the United States. So a lot of our work happens, in private roundtables, in, not just, the big public events, but really trying to dig in sometimes on the questions that are easier to ask in private and easier to get honest answers in private. So it's an interesting space to be in. I've been at the Wilson Center now for 4.5 years. And for the last year, I've actually led the Brazil Institute. I got promoted after our old director retired. So that's been, a great opportunity and a challenge for me to grow as well. And so I think I would just leave you with the note that, as you're thinking about where you want your career to go, don't just think about job positions, right? Think about what you would like to learn, what you enjoy doing. And when you're in jobs, it's the same thing. Think about, what skills do you want to develop? How can you carve out space within the job you have to do something else that interests you? Because that is really what will set you up for your next move. So happy to answer questions later on.
Thank you so much, Anya. Mia, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Anna, for the introduction. And Anna, it's great to be able to be with you and speaking with Anya today. As Anna said, I graduated UF in 2018. I majored in international studies and had a minor of Spanish, and later tacked on a minor of nonprofit leadership as well, too. I at first did not really know what I wanted to do after graduation, as I'm sure many of you are in that boat as well. I knew I ideally wanted to do something in the NGO sector, as that had been one of my minors. I had interned for a nonprofit in Gainesville as well, too, and really enjoyed that experience. And ideally something with an international lens, too. So junior and senior year, as I was debating it, I considered, well, maybe I'll go to grad school. But I felt like I wanted to get a little bit of experience first, just because I was quite unsure of, what that next step was going to be and where I wanted to go with it. So senior spring, I started applying to a variety of different jobs, mainly in the DC area, which is where I am now, as Anna said. I knew I wanted to be up in DC, but didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I was hoping, again, for something with that intersection between nonprofit and international context. And I was finding it very difficult to apply to jobs remotely within the DC area. So I started applying to internships instead, and was very fortunate to be able to land an internship with the United Nations Foundation. And now we have internships still. Now they are paid, which is wonderful. At the time, they were unpaid. So Anya, how you talked about that leap a little bit, I feel like my leap was moving to DC on an unpaid internship. And I had about 4 or 5 side hustles throughout that summer, just trying to pay for rent. And as I was gaining this professional experience, and that was certainly a bit daunting, but worked out very well. I really enjoyed my experience there. The United Nations Foundation, we are a separate entity from the UN. We were, just for a little bit of background, we were founded in the 90s by Ted Turner. So he gave this historic $1 billion gift that he wanted to be able to fund directly to the United Nations. And at the time, there really was not a mechanism to do so. So we were established as a grant-making organization to support the United Nations. Today, we do still use some of Ted Turner's funding. However, we have a lot of our own programs and initiatives, and we work closely with the UN as well as the WHO and other partners to support their work. So I started initially as an intern, as I said, on our United Nations Association team. That is a grassroots advocacy team. They have campus chapters and community chapters across the US. So I got a little bit of taste of advocacy, which I really liked. And really great experience, but as I said, was still looking for a job. And fortunately, something became available on our contracts team, which I was not intending whatsoever to move into contracts. But, sometimes you just have to kind of go with the flow a bit, but worked out really well. I at first felt like a fish out of water. The rest of my team had a legal background. I did not. I was straight out of undergrad. So it was very much learning quickly on the job, but still wonderful experience. I was able to help with grant management. So anytime we were receiving money, I would help edit those grants and contracts. Anytime we were sending money out, I would, make sure that everything was okay there. A lot of donor compliance too, to be sure that we were being compliant to our donors. So, I think sometimes you don't necessarily think you'll go in the direction of where you'll end up. But as I said, worked out very well, learned some very good skills. And I am still at the foundation today. However, now I am with our integrated development team, which is essentially what we call our fundraising team. So I work with our individual donors as well as corporate partners, which has also been a really good experience. So, while I didn't intend to be more on the operational side, I think it's been really wonderful experience. I really enjoyed it. For me, it's been a really good cross of being able to find, my skill set and what I'm really good at, I think also with my passion, because I do really feel passionate about the mission of the United Nations Foundation. So it's been a really great intersect. And I'll also echo, as Anya said too, that I'm more than happy to answer any questions more about my personal journey, more about my job function, more about the job and internship search. Really, however, I can be of help to anybody.
I would just jump in if I could, because Mia mentioned fundraising, and that is one of those skills that you never think about, but is so, so important in Washington, D.C. So just going to toss that out there.
Thanks, Anya. Yes, it is certainly a very crucial skill too, and one that I'm fortunate I get to, be able to be working on right now.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you both so much. And I just want to remind everybody on here that, this is open for questions. It's a conversation. So feel free to pop those questions in the chat or raise the little virtual hand and we'll call on you. While we wait for those questions to come in, I'll go ahead and ask my own. So you both mentioned, internships that you did and how those helped you get into the work field. So what tips do you have for students that are interning right now? Personally, I'm interning. I'd love to hear what is your take on what things to get out of your internship and, what skills to hone. Whoever wants to go first.
I can jump in. I would say, while you're interning, ask for feedback. That's probably one of the most important things you can do. And I personally am always impressed when an intern comes to me and says, I'd like to know how I'm doing. How can I do better, right, to support you? And for me, having interns, there have been internships where you get that feedback and internships where you don't. In one internship, I was told that I needed to pay more attention to the details, right? Make sure I was getting every single fact correct, make sure I was citing everything in my work. And that stuck with me, right? That's really important feedback for me as a professional. And so if you're not getting it as an intern, definitely ask.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think that certainly shows that you are very interested in, reflecting upon your work product. And I think really shows to your supervisor or your colleagues that, you're really invested in this opportunity and you're making the most of it. I'll also add too, as you're able to volunteer for any work, I've always been very impressed by interns who will take the initiative and, even if it's something very small, just a small project, something mentioned in a meeting or email chain, you just say, hey, how can I help with that? Or do you need any additional support with that? I think that can go a very long way too. And I'd also say too, while you're interning, I would do as best as you can to kind of get to meet other people, even beyond your team within the organization or company. I think it's a really wonderful way to expand your network, and just to be able to meet with other people and, kind of pick their brain about, well, what's their career, what has their career path been? What does that look like? I think it's just a wonderful way to get to talk to new people.
Thank you both. So we have a couple questions coming in. The first is from Sophia, and this is for Anya. Can you tell me more about your experience in the Masters of Public Policy program? How has it benefited you in your career and personal journey?
So I decided to go back for a master's in public policy for two reasons. The first was that, when I got back to DC after time in Brazil and I was looking at jobs that interested me, so many of them had an economic or a statistic component to them, where you had to understand at least the basics, right? And I had studiously avoided economics and statistics in undergrad, and my first master's, I did not want to do it. And so that was kind of the cold, hard truth, where I was going to have to learn these topics if I wanted to succeed in, the career that interested me. So that was a huge part in sending me back to getting that degree. The second reason was that it just opened doors, right? It was another way to network, another way to get access to internships that eventually, led to my current position. The public policy degree itself, it varies from school to school. So I think it's really important to look at the specific university you're interested in. Some are more focused on domestic public policy, right? Like education or healthcare or budgeting here in the US. I chose a program that had an international component. So that was the track I followed. And it really is a mix of the more academic classes, which would be like statistics or econ, and the more, I took like public policy theory, right? And the more like professional oriented classes, which for me really interesting because I hadn't done that before. So, I took a class on negotiations. I took a class on strategic communications. I took a class on, project design and management for international development, where they literally walk you through like, what are the different things you need to think of? How do you do monitoring and evaluation? I don't use all of it, but I think it was really useful for me. So I would say, a public policy master's sits kind of somewhere between an MBA and a traditional MA. But if you're considering that route, really look at the classes in each degree program, because that will give you a good sense of what you're going to get out of it.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask now Addie's question. And he says, say, Anya mentioned hiring a lot of interns. I was wondering how cover letters factor into that process. What do you like to see, or what's a red flag? Anya, if you can go ahead, and then Mia can add afterwards.
Yeah, so I was always told, that interviewers, they'll spend like 5 minutes tops reviewing your application. And to be honest, it's true, right? Because we just get so many that you have to go through them really quickly. And so when I get an application packet, the first two things I look at are the resume and the cover letter. And I'm usually looking for very specific skills or knowledge that we always put in the job description, right? We tell you exactly what we want, and I want to see those things front and center when I'm looking at your resume or your cover letter. So for us, for the Brazil Institute, we do a lot of our work in Portuguese. You have to be able to speak Portuguese, maybe not fluently, but at least, proficiently. And so if you have a cover letter or a resume that doesn't say, Portuguese somewhere on it, I won't even look at it. In terms of the cover letter itself, I am looking for something that isn't simply, a summary of your resume. The cover letter is my chance in like 2 minutes to get to know you, what your goals are, what skills you can bring to this particular position, what you think you can do for us, and what you want to gain out of the experience. And so for me, that's what I look for, right? Somebody who is passionate about Brazil and international policy. I want to see that come through on the cover letter. I want to see that they've, thought about this internship, that they know what it is and what they'll be doing. And again, all of this is in the job description. And, ideally someone who can weave a story about their own experience and their own interests and how that relates to the work that we do. So I hope that's helpful. Happy to talk more about it later as well.
Yeah, I would completely second what Anya said about, grabbing snippets as you can out of the job description is huge. When I was on the contracts team, we hired a few associates while I was on there, and I assisted with the hiring process. And for one position, we had a reasonable amount of applicants, I think 70 in total for a few weeks. And the second one, we got 70 applicants in one day. And I can tell you for the one with the large volume, I was not able to read every word of every resume and every cover letter as much as I would have loved to. So I would certainly say, try to have as best of a format, as clean of a format, especially for the resume, to make it very skimmable. So, we're able to go through and pick out those words, as Anya said, that we're looking for. And for the cover letter, absolutely want somebody who, is really passionate and cares about the mission, has that mission-driven component, as well as, has that skill set too. But that's telling me something a bit different than, what we read in the resume. That is really your opportunity to elaborate a little bit more, get to know you a little bit more rather than, just bullet points of your experience. So it's certainly a juggling game between that, but then also keeping it as concise and to the point as possible is very advantageous.
Yeah, I would just add, building on Mia's point, the cover letter is your chance to show that you can write. And that is also very important, right? We're looking for people who communicate effectively and, as Mia said, efficiently. There's a huge difference between a lot of the work that we do and the papers and research that we put out. It's rarely going to be a 10-page essay like you might do in college.
Thank you both. That's actually super helpful, both of your tips. So I have another question from Sophia, and this time I'll start with Mia. How have you found the professional/personal life balance in the field of government/international relations to be?
That's a great question. And I think it really depends, where you are. So where you are in government, what kind of organization. I don't know if one sector necessarily kind of has a typical brand of the work-life balance. I would say, for me, the UN Foundation does a very good job of giving us a really generous amount of vacation days. They very much value, that culture of being able to step away a little bit. I think personally, it's been even better. Working from home has provided that additional flexibility. Just cutting out that commuting time has been wonderful. But, I think it's a very fair question to ask in an interview process too, as you're, get further along within the interview process. Is just ask, what is your culture like too? And I think, that a lot can really, really be said within that process.
Yeah, I would add it varies depending on position, right? So, to some extent, it also is going to depend on like you as an individual, right? And the boundaries that you set. For me, before I got my current role, kind of leading the Brazil Institute, it was relatively easy to have, set departure times at work. What I found now is that because my role is much broader, right? Like I'm talking with journalists, I'm answerable to our funders. So there's a lot more going on that sometimes requires immediate responses. So it's harder to have like a distinct separation, right? I can't clock out at 5 o'clock or 5:30. Things come up. But what I try to do is just recognize that there is an ebb and a flow. There's going to be weeks where work is less. And on those days, especially working from home, I might not do quite as much during the day. You know, maybe I'll do laundry or I'll go for a walk, right? I'll take the breaks that I need to recharge. And then I recognize that, you know, maybe the next week something's going to happen. We're having a lot of crises right now in Brazil. And so there's just been a lot going on, and it's been nonstop. And, you know, I'm waiting for that period to end and to have my weekends back. But I think, you know, just recognizing that, that there is going to be sometimes this ebb and this flow where some weeks will be easier than others. And sometimes depending on your position, you know, there will be demands on your time. So I think it's about knowing what you need in a job. And then, you know, if you want like that hard separation, you can find it. If you don't mind being on call, then you can find that, right? So it's really finding the position that fits what you need to feel balanced and grounded in your life.
Thank you both so much. I think it's always great to hear that insight of how life actually looks like in these positions. So I have a question from Anthony, and it's, if you were able to be a student today, what would you advise yourself on based on your working experience gathered over the years? And we can start off with Mia again and then hop back to Anya.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think I wish as a student I did take more advantage of the Career Resource Center. I don't think I can say that I went one time, which is terrible. I really wish that at some point I had gone at minimum for, you know, the resume and the cover letter resources. I think once you know, are out in the world, you realize that those are some very valuable resources to have for free and very close on campus. Especially the interview prep too as well. I think those all would have been very wonderful things to take advantage of. I'd also say, you know, I've really used LinkedIn a fair amount as a resource, and that is something that I wish I started sooner. And by that, I mean, you know, really just looking through my network and seeing people I'm connected with, even a degree or two, and cold messaging people and asking for phone calls. I have been really surprised with how receptive that people are with that. And I've really gained a lot of knowledge from that, just speaking to other people about their careers, their journeys. Right now, I'm currently looking at going back to school. So I'm looking at graduate programs, and that has been a wonderful resource for me to, you know, find certain individuals that have attended programs that I'm interested in. And I started doing this, I think, about the end of my senior year, which actually was a huge help for me finding the internship at the UN Foundation. I was able to connect with somebody there. But for me, it's just been a really wonderful resource, both to, you know, broaden my network a bit, but also just in terms of learning what's out there, you know, and what different job opportunities and in my case too, program opportunities also.
I would just second what Mia said. I think starting to kind of network and getting, you know, professional experiences while you're still in school can be so incredibly important. And with networking, I mean, for me, I remember, you know, from day one at UF being told, like, you have to network, that's how you'll find a job. And I was pretty introverted. And the idea of like having to meet people I didn't know and have conversations and then stay in touch, like it just felt overwhelming. And to this day, I mean, I network in a way that feels authentic to me. And I think that's the most important thing, right? Like, I think it's really about quality over quantity. And maybe I just say that because that's, you know, that's my style. But you know, don't feel like you have to force interactions with people. I think that people will sense that, right? So when you're on LinkedIn or you're trying to network through connections you already have, it's looking for people that you're genuinely interested in, and not just to get the job, right? But to learn about, you know, how they got where they are, and to ask them questions about, you know, what they care about, what would they recommend. People love to talk about themselves, you know, as Mia and I are showing you tonight. So it's a great way, you know, to start that relationship. And then, you know, you can just send someone like a news article and be like, hey, I saw this and it reminded me of our conversation. or, there are all these little ways to check in, and it doesn't have to be a lot. It can even just be once or twice a year. But, building connections that there is some sort of genuine interest, right, on your part, I think are really important.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you're both here talking about yourselves. It's a really great conversation. So Sophia had another question, and it goes to you, Anya, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what did a day at your current position in the Brazil Institute and your previous position in the State Department look like?
So I'll start with the State Department because that's a little more straightforward. I was essentially like a Foreign Affairs Officer trainee. It was through the Pathways program, which if any of you are interested in diplomacy, I would strongly encourage you to check it out. It provides a pathway. It's not foreign service, right? It's civil service, but it provides a pathway for recent graduates as well as current students to get internships that can then lead to, kind of like full-time, right, permanent career positions. So it's the Pathways program, and you can find it on the State Department's website. So I was, essentially like a junior staff member, and I worked in the Office of Brazil and Southern Cone Affairs and supported the desk officers for Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, and Paraguay, and then the regional portfolio, which looked a lot at like security issues, so nuclear security, which might be surprising for the region, but also things like trafficking in persons and intellectual property rights. And so day to day, it was honestly a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls, and a lot of writing. I was in charge of drafting a lot of the paper that the office used, so like briefing memos for our assistant secretary on up to the Secretary of State, doing talking points, for example, or, drafting press statements that would be, heavily revised, but then later used. And so it wasn't maybe the most glamorous job. I spent a lot of time calling people because when you write, for example, a briefing paper at the State Department, say you're writing a memo on deforestation in the Amazon, and it's going to be really short. It's like 400 words, one page, 14-point font, double spaced, 2 pages tops, right? So you have to get a lot of information in just a very small amount of space. But once you've drafted it, you then have to get it cleared by every single person at the State Department who might have some sort of interest in that particular topic, right? So if it's the Amazon, you have to clear it with like the Colombia desk and the Ecuador desk and the Peru desk and the Venezuela desk. But then you also have to clear it with, the Bureau of Oceans and Atmosphere, and with the climate change policy team, and with your own, internal economic and environment policy team within the Bureau of Western Hemispheres, right? So you might end up having to run this, 400-word document by 20 different people before you're allowed to send it on. And usually the window for doing this is like 24 to 48 hours. So you write really fast and then you send it to a bunch of people and give them really tight deadlines. And then you have to call them and follow up and just be like, you owe me this document, like you have to look at it. So that was my first real job experience, which at the time it was like terrifying to call up people who were far more senior than I and kind of demand like, you have to review my document and get it back to me. But again, I think it was a really great skill to have. To just be able to cold call people or, to impose deadlines. I use that a lot now. The thing about the State Department that I didn't quite realize going in is that you very rarely are making public policy. You're really just implementing it. And the way you're implementing it is not going to be designed at the desk level or the office level, right? It really is coming from the president on down. And so it's a fascinating place to be because you do see the constraints, but at the same time, you see the constraints and you're bound within them. So there's not a lot of space, especially at the junior level, I felt, to kind of help, I think, move the wheel, if that makes sense. So for me, being at the Brazil Institute is very, very different, right? We're tiny. We normally have a staff of just 3 people. And, you know, with that, we're much more nimble, but we're also at the front end of the policy development, right? We're doing the research, we're hosting the events. We are the people who are ideally helping to shape what policymakers think and do. You know, that's our goal. So it's kind of two different ends of the policymaking timeline. And day to day at the Brazil Institute, it just varies widely, right? If we're hosting a public event, I might spend, you know, part of the morning like writing my opening remarks and thinking through what questions I'm going to ask people, answering any last minute questions from our speakers. So there's a lot of kind of email traffic and managing of relationships that goes on a day-to-day level. Fundraising is a huge component of my job. I am responsible for making sure my own salary gets paid and that of my team. You know, if I don't bring the money in, the Brazil Institute doesn't stay open. So that is obviously a huge, huge priority for me. So, you know, part of the day is reaching out to funders and managing the relationships with the funders I already have. I would love to say a part of my day every day went to research and writing, but it doesn't. And what I've learned is that it's hard to carve out time for like the thinking part of think tanks. You really have to be deliberate and disciplined. So my goal, I don't always achieve it, but my goal is to spend, you know, like the first 2 hours of every day just kind of reading and writing. But in reality, it's probably once or twice a week that I can carve out that time. Let me see, I'm trying to think. I mean, it really is a very reactive environment, I guess is the other thing I would say. Like we do have longer term projects. For example, we have a project on sustainable development in the Amazon. We have another project on gender-based violence. We're building a global index of gender-based violence data. You know, so these are projects that are, you know, year-long or multi-year. But then a lot of what we're doing kind of day to day is just responding to the moment. So, you know, something pops up and we want to put out a podcast or host an event or put out a blog post. So there is a lot of kind of reassessing your priorities each and every day and kind of shifting things that no longer are quite so important.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting to see, like you said, the two ends of the policy making spectrum. So thank you. So we have another question from Andy, and he starts off by saying, thank you for talking to us today. With both of your roles, I'll start with Mia and then we'll go to Anya. And so with your roles, how much time do you spend outside of the United States? Are you ever worried about being far from home?
So for my role, neither my current role nor my previous with the foundation did involve any travel. And that's, you know, primarily because I am more on the operational side. We do have some colleagues within that work more closely and more focused on the program work that will travel. However, you know, the UN Foundation, we are very much focused on US-UN relations. So I would say we would not travel as much as, say, if you were part of a UN agency or something of that sort too. So I would say within my office, little traveling. However, I think broadly within the field, you are very likely to be able to find positions where you can travel. In terms of worrying about being far from home, you know, as I mentioned, I'm looking towards grad school and I'm considering, oh, do I want to be abroad or not, do I not? So I definitely, you know, understand that kind of dynamic of, you know, how long would you want to be abroad, away from your friends and family? And I think, you know, it really is just whatever is kind of best for you. I think personally, I could do maybe a year or two abroad. I know myself well enough that I don't want to settle anywhere abroad. So, you know, I know that I would ultimately, I think, want to have my established career with here stateside. But yeah, I think it just is completely a personal preference.
Yeah, I would just quickly second what Mia said. I think most jobs, if they require a lot of travel, they will say that up front in the job description. So you can kind of decide if that is for you or not. There are some jobs like consulting where travel is just going to be a part of the game, right? And if you want to go into that field, you're going to have to either love it or accept it. But there's plenty of jobs within, the international public service space where you don't really need to travel. Even for me, I mean, I work on US Brazil issues. Before, the pandemic hit, I would only go down to Brazil, 4, maybe 5 times a year. So not nearly at like the level that a consultant might be, right? Where you're traveling every other week. So I think you can find balance. In terms of, kind of safety and security, I think a lot of it is just, doing your research before you go somewhere. And then, trusting your gut. Take taxis at night if that's what it takes.
So we have a question from Emma, and it starts off for both of you. At what point in your careers did you know / feel when it was right for you to head to grad school? Especially since Mia said she's starting to think about it now. What experiences, either in school or through your time working, made you think, okay, yeah, it would make sense to go to grad school now? Let's start with Mia, since Emma did reference you directly, and then Anya, you can fill in afterwards.
Absolutely. Great question, Emma. And as I said in my introduction, I was thinking about grad school even when I was about to graduate from UF. So it can certainly be hard to know. I think for me personally, I did not have a very clear idea upon graduation what area I wanted to move into. And for some people, that means that grad school is a wonderful choice. I think for me personally, I was eager to get a little bit more work experience, to really just, if anything, discover a little bit more of what's out there. I think it was kind of hard for me in undergrad to really even be aware of what different careers do I have, or opportunities do I even have open to me. I think that was kind of difficult to be able to foresee. And at this point, I've been working for about 3 years. I think within my field, it is a little bit hard to keep moving up and to keep growing professionally without a master's. Not to say it can't be done, particularly in fundraising, you do not need one. But I do kind of want to stay within that social impact space and maybe get a little bit more of that program management experience. And I think for that reason, I really need to build some more of those skill sets within an academic setting is what's best for me. So I think when you get to that point when there's, a new kind of skill set, or if you want to make a transition, then that could be a time when, maybe a graduate degree is a good point for you, or is a good option for you.
Yeah, Mia just gave excellent advice. I did grad school twice. And I don't want to say I got it wrong the first time, because I love my program and I learned a lot. And, one of my professors ended up becoming, the guy who hired me at the Wilson Center. So, in so many ways it did work out. But I ended up going back to grad school because the first time around I had done something I loved, but I hadn't thought maybe strategically about like what skills I needed to know. And so the second time I went back for that, right, to get the skills I wanted for the jobs that I wanted. And so I think, as you're thinking about grad school, it's really, think about like how grad school is going to kind of push you in the direction you want to go, and whether you can get there without grad school. Those are kind of the questions to ask, I think.
Thank you both. So I have a question from Abigail. Anya, how was your experience with consulting?
So I was at the Albright Stonebridge Group, which is what we would call like a boutique strategic consulting firm, right? It's relatively small, like 100, 150 employees. So nothing like, the Deloittes or the McKinseys of the world. And they're very focused on kind of guiding companies and supporting companies who are dealing with specific challenges or specific goals. So that might be market entry. If you want to enter a new country and you need to understand, the market conditions, your competitors, what the regulations might be. They work with companies that are having a crisis. So say, you've been operating in a country, you ran afoul of a regulation, and now you need to rebuild your reputation and, handle some of the fallout. They can help you come up with a plan for that. Or, just more general concerns. Sometimes companies will contract them to just provide like longer term support, for who they need to talk to, how to navigate the political environment, kind of to give, risk assessments of what might happen and how that might impact their business. So for me, it was a really, really interesting experience. Before that, I had been like firmly ensconced in kind of like research and government. And so working at Albright Stonebridge was the first time that I was really thinking about kind of the broader policy environment and how like economic interests and corporations are involved in the policy space and what that looks like. So it really opened my eyes there. It was also the first time I was working for a place where you had to earn your keep, right? It's a business, you have to profit. And so that means bringing in new clients. And so I, started to learn how to do like business development, how to, read the news and be like, oh, Citibank is leaving Brazil. What does that mean? Like, maybe can we approach Citibank? Like, is there an opportunity for us to reach out and, get them as a client? So you start to make, I think, kind of those sorts of connections and maybe become a little bit more entrepreneurial, which when I was in the government, that wasn't so much, I think, a priority. So for me, it was a huge opportunity for growth and to see a different side of things, which I now use a lot because, one of the primary sources of money for my program, the Brazil Institute, is corporations, who are doing like corporate social responsibility work. And so knowing how to talk to companies, how to think the way they think is a tremendous asset when I'm approaching them for money. So the reason I left Albright Stonebridge in the end was, this job came up at the Brazil Institute, and it had always been kind of a dream for me to work at the Wilson Center. I had gone to Wilson Center events in grad school, like I loved it. And also, it was an opportunity, I think, to get back into more of a pure research space, if that makes sense. When you have clients, you're at, you doing what the client needs, essentially. And so at the Wilson Center, there's a little bit more like academic freedom to pursue the issues you think are important.
Thank you. So here's a question for both of you, and we can start with Mia. Where do you want to be in 5 years?
Oh goodness, the interview question. Very good question. I think, as I'm looking to move into a graduate program, likely if not next year, then the following year, I think I would like to be finished with the program and really just have my next step somewhat established. I think, looking ahead, somebody gave me good advice as, you're really just looking at your next step. You don't have to think, what's my end goal? Because I think it's, it's kind of hard to know. New opportunities will be presented to you. As I said, both of my jobs, neither did I intend to really get into, but they both just sort of worked out that way. So I think looking at my next move, I would like to do something, as I mentioned, within the social impact area. Particularly, in my current position, I work very closely with corporate partners, which I very much enjoy. And Anya, as you were saying a bit too, I really like that intersect between the NGO and the corporations too, and that CSR or corporate social responsibility kind of work. So I could see myself moving into that after graduate school. But I think I kind of want to see, where that experience takes me and where I land. And from there kind of continue to pivot. So I'm trying to stay open-minded kind of as I happen.
So if you had asked me that question a year ago, I would have told you my current job. And I haven't really decided where I want to go from here. I think, for me, as I look ahead, it's maybe less about like what job would I like next and more about, what do I like about my current job and what could I do without about my current job? And then honestly, doing the same thing that we've been talking about for you, right? Informational interviews, seeing what's out there, getting a sense for where I could go next. I've been at the Wilson Center for 4.5 years, which is far longer than I intended. I thought I would be there a year or two. And I've been fortunate to find, a path to move upward. So for me, right, if that continues, if there is ongoing room for growth, and that I feel like I continue to be challenged and continue to have new opportunities. You know, I might still be here in 5 years, but I might also be somewhere else. So I don't know that I have an end goal in mind, but I think for me, whatever I do, I want to be in a position where I feel like I can kind of, you know, really dig in on some of the big questions, the why questions, when it comes to kind of Brazil and US relations.
Well, wherever you both are in 5 years, I wish you both best of luck. While there's a little break, I'm going to sneak in my own question. So to Anya, actually, you mentioned those 2 years you spent working at the Getúlio Vargas Foundation. How can you speak a little bit more into that? And also particularly, how was it adapting to, working in a different country? I'm kind of going a little bit through that right now with interning, and it's been an adaptation. So I'd love to hear what was your perspective.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe it's being an American. I kind of thought that I would just move down to Brazil and find a job and get a visa and it would just magically work out. So I moved when I, you know, left for Brazil. I had a conditional job offer in hand at the Fundação Getúlio Vargas, which is a Brazilian business school, economic school, and think tank. But the condition was that I had to figure out my own visa. And to be completely honest, I never figured it out. So instead of being a research assistant, I ended up getting, get to be a researcher, which was an unfunded position, right? Because that was what was allowed under my visa. But it did give me an opportunity to interact with the researchers and to do my own research. So I think, that's one lesson, right? Is that sometimes things don't work out the way you've planned. But you can still make the best of it. And, some of the connections I made there are still valuable to me to this day. We do a lot of work with FGV. And so it's good to have, kind of that more personal relationship with them. I think in Brazil, one of the first adaptations for me was that it is a more informal work culture, and that was surprisingly even to the way that you dress. I was coming from DC where we were business suits all day long. Business casual for us is like a blouse and slacks without the suit. And so, I was showing up in Brazil like that, and it took me a little while to kind of, I think, adjust, the way I looked, so I wasn't sticking out like a sore thumb. And I think in Brazil, just, for me, some of the personal interactions, they were more informal. There's a greater degree of warmth. There's more, I think, flexibility with regards to schedules. But the other thing about Brazil for me was recognizing that because people are very friendly, it's often very hard for them to say no to things. So you'll get a very soft letdown or a soft rejection that as an American, I didn't always realize was a rejection. And so just kind of learning that some of the signals, right, don't translate super well. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. I can definitely, the informal part got me by surprise a little bit too.
Yes.
So I have another question for Mia from Tara. So Mia, you talked about having an unpaid internship when you moved to DC and having to have side jobs to make things work. Can you just share a little bit more about that experience? Would you recommend someone else move to DC like you did, even if they can't find a paid position prior to moving?
Yes, great question. I would say it definitely was fairly exhausting, because I was working during business hours and able to do side hustles as much as I could on evenings and weekends. But I think it really depends on your situation. I knew I really wanted to be within the DC area, so I exclusively looked at positions in DC. If you are a little bit more flexible, then you might have a little bit more opportunity there. I will say that, when you're somewhere in person and you're able to kind of get to know colleagues in person, I think it really does, or even if not in person, but virtual, I think being able to have that opportunity and get your foot in the door really makes the difference. I know that I do not think I would have gotten my first position with the foundation if I had not been an intern. I really think that that paved the way for it. And, I was kind of finding that, when I was applying to full-time positions, I was really having a hard time finding anything, which is why I kind of expanded my scope a little bit to internships. And I think, as I said, that really paved the way. So it definitely is tough, can be a bit daunting. And it is just unfortunate that so many internships are unpaid, but corporations and of course government internships are too, but they know they can because so many people are applying for them and so many people want them, that the reality is they really do not have to pay. So it is definitely a bit tough. But if it's something that you are up for and that you think you can do, I do completely recommend it.
Thank you. So while maybe some other questions come in, I'll sneak in another one of mine. What kind of experiences, maybe whether it be classes or involvement at UF, do you think were most valuable, and what skills and those experiences were you able to apply to your professional development, whether it be in a past job or an internship or to where you are now? And we can start off with Anya.
I'll jump in. I think, several classes I took at the University of Florida really taught me how to write well. And that has been, I honestly think that is one of the most important factors in where I've gotten, is just my ability to write clearly. And, shout out to Dr. Jacobs, because his class was one of them. I think at UF as well, so I did Model United Nations while I was there. And I think that was another really great experience because, again, I guess my theme is just communications, right? But with Model UN, you're learning how to argue your point. You're learning how to stand up in front of a crowd of, 100, maybe more people and speak, sometimes off the cuff. You're learning how to, negotiate with people and persuade them to come around to your side. And so I think, a lot of those skills are really important as well once you get into the job space.
Yeah, I would completely second that, especially the writing skills. I remember, and Dr. Jacobs, I think this was from your course, but I remember reading a paper I wrote freshman year versus a paper I wrote junior or senior year. And I was just completely embarrassed reading what freshman year me had written. So I think my transformation throughout my undergrad career was pretty remarkable in terms of, my writing. And I think that's something that UF and the professors do very, very well, because so many of our classes, the assessments are based on papers, and that's absolutely a skill, I think, across sectors and across different positions. If you're, more programmatic, if you're, working in fundraising operations, you have to know how to write and how to communicate. That is just a very strong skill set. I'd say also, a lot of just campus involvement and group projects too, and really just any opportunities for collaboration. I think just having those, that skill to be able to work, alone well, but then also work with other people, and having the work product depend, not just on you, but on other people too, and how well you can communicate and, work together to produce a work product is really huge too, because that's something you have to do in the workplace. You have to collaborate with colleagues. Sometimes people are friendly, sometimes they are not, but you have to be able to work well with other people. And I think that's also, a very helpful skill that I was able to take from undergrad as well.
Thank you both. I think that's a great tip about reading the papers. I think I'm going to do that at the end of my senior year, and I hope there's a transformation. So we have one last question, and then Dr. Jacobs is going to speak, say a few words. And so last question is, did either of you feel limited in any way for being a woman? And we can start with Anya and then go to Mia, since Mia just spoke.
That's a really interesting question. So one of the things, I guess I'll back it up a little. I don't know that I have felt limited by being a woman, but I have certainly felt the fact that I am a woman, if that makes sense. I think I have certainly felt, since moving to the think tank space that I have noticed that, when we're in the office, often our outside guests will turn to the women to get coffee and these types of things that that I, have now worked to change because I want there to be different patterns, right? In the think tank world, we have a thing that we call manels, so all male panels. And it is a problem, it is endemic, and a lot of people don't even notice. And so one of the good things is that I do think that there has been more awareness of this in recent years. Certainly at the Wilson Center, we now have an explicit policy of making sure that we are, equitable when it comes to who we are putting on our panels as experts, because, in part, the people we select, then they gain credibility and status. So they're more likely to be selected for other things. So it's important to help, I think, change the narratives. I guess, for me personally, I have been, in some ways my career has been odd in that until recently, every, CEO or whatever I worked for was a woman, right? Like I was at the State Department under Hillary Clinton. I was at the Albright-Stonebridge Group under Madeleine Albright. When I came to the Wilson Center, our CEO is Jane Harmon. And all of these women, really pushed for women's rights and female empowerment. And I think I've felt that in the workplace. We do have a guy now as the CEO of the Wilson Center, but he cares deeply about inclusion as well. So I don't think it's going to change. So I think for me, there hasn't been like a specific instance where I felt like I didn't get something or I was held back because I'm a woman. I think what I have become more aware of throughout the course of my career are some of the more I guess, structural challenges, right, that impact all of us in ways that you don't always see. So, when you're thinking about who to invite to write a paper or who to invite to speak on a panel, or deciding, what does an expert look like? I think that's where we still have some ways to go in making sure that it is a more equitable playing field.
Yeah, I would completely second all of what Anya just said. I don't think I could say it better myself. And yes, I remember first hearing the term manels when I had first joined as an intern. And, it's certainly something that you very much see. And yeah, I think we, are very much taking a turn that foundations and in government work too, to really value diversity in the workplace too, which is very, very important. And I'd say in terms of gender, the nonprofit sector tends to be pretty female. My organization is, I think we're 70% female, 30% male. Although interesting enough too, as you go a little bit further up, then it does tend to be a little bit more male in those senior positions. So that is definitely, something there. But I've also, as Anya has as well, I've had mainly actually all female supervisors. All of my direct supervisors and bosses have been female too, which has been great. So I would say similarly, I have not had, a single situation or where that's been very, very apparent to me. I've been very fortunate in that regard. I've had friends who have. A good friend of mine who is a fellow somewhere, she was casually chatting with another fellow one day, and they realized that they were being paid two different salaries, and they asked some other people, and it did kind of correspond to gender lines. And you kind of, I think it's easy to think, oh no, we're past that, it doesn't really happen, but it still does. So not to say it's non-existent, but I have luckily been pretty fortunate in that regard.
Yeah. What I will say is, especially as a woman, but this is important for men too, but I think men maybe feel more comfortable doing it, is, if you are in an internship and you want a job, speak up and say something, right? And you get that job offer, negotiate, don't feel bad, right? You're supposed to do it. And your employer is expecting you to, so they've lowballed you from the start. So I think as women, sometimes we don't want to be seen as, not nice. We want to be seen as a team player. And so it's really important to remember that you also have to look out for yourself and you have to advocate for yourself. And I mean, that's true across the board, right? No matter who you are. But I think sometimes women are taught that they're not supposed to do that. So you have to just speak up for yourself.
And I would add too, also within the job search process too, I've read somewhere that, women are less likely to apply to positions and only if they check every single box, whereas men, it's a lower percentage of too. So I'd say, and I've been guilty of that too, of being discouraged if, not everything within the JD, within the job description is applicable to me. But, I'd say that, that's applicable there as too when you're looking for positions. It never hurts to go for it.
Thank you both so much. This has been a pleasure and great to meet you both. And thank you for everything that you shared. I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Jacobs. And again, thank you so much. And thank you for everybody's questions.
Thanks, Anna, Anya, and Mia. Welcome, everybody. I just want to say a couple of quick things. First, thank you to both Anya and Mia for the kind words about your time in my classes. I appreciate that. Sorry for making you work so hard on your writing, but I'm glad it paid off in the end. One thing I'll say is that both Mia and Anya brought to class was they checked their ego at the door when it came time to actually look at their writing. And that's something that's really hard with good students, is because most of the time, students don't get much feedback on their writing. And so the first time that they actually do, it's often a bit of a shock. And so being open to constructive criticism of how to keep working on writing is really, really important. Second thing I want to say, going back to the closing point there about women in the workplace and hiring, yes, the studies show that women, if you say there are 10 things in a job description, women typically will not apply for a position unless they check at least 8 of those boxes. Males will typically apply if they check somewhere between 3 and 5 of those boxes. So it's literally that stark of a difference. But from a hiring perspective, and both Anya and Mia could probably confirm this from their perspective as well, is no candidate for a position actually checks every box, right? There's no candidate that is literally the perfect candidate that brings everything that you want at the highest possible level for any position that you're hiring for. So from the hiring side of things, if we're hiring someone, we all know right from the top that every candidate will not have something, right? The question is, where are our greatest priorities? Which matter the most to us? Which do we think we can train and build up most easily and most quickly versus which would take longer, and how do we prioritize those? So no person applying for a job should feel like they have to have every box checked, because literally no one is going to have every box checked. So that's a second quick point. The third point I just wanted to mention really quickly was, as Mia and Anya were going through the various presentations and talking through the questions, one thing that I hope you all take away from this is a point that they each stated explicitly once, but implicitly many times. And that is that neither one of them have had their lives all mapped out. And whatever they thought they were going to do right when they graduated from undergrad, that very quickly changed. And that is the case. Anybody who's come to talk to me about career advice has heard this conversation about, you need to think about what you want to do next. Yes. Where you want to be 2 or 3 years out, and what would be the general parameters of what you want to be working on over the course of a career. Because why would we expect someone who's 22 to think they know exactly what they want to do until they're 65, right? Why would we expect that? You don't know what life is going to throw at you, positive or negative. You don't know what opportunities are going to come and go, all of those kinds of things. So that open-mindedness and constantly thinking in a very near term, kind of an intermediate term and a long term, and what are the parameters that help you evaluate opportunities? And that's really where these pointers come in really, really helpful in helping you define for yourself I call them the guardrails. What are the guardrails that keep you on a path, recognizing that path is going to wind and twist and turn over time? And then finally, I just want to thank you both for your participation. It's really great to have you both back here virtually. Love to have you both come back in person at some point. And it's great to see you succeeding. And we really appreciate you sharing your time with our students and providing this kind of service for our students. It's really great for them. And I hope you've enjoyed it too. And thank you to Anna for moderating.
Thank you, Dr. Jacobs. Anna, it's been such a pleasure to be with all of you tonight.
Yes, thank you. This was so wonderful. I'm really happy we're able to have this conversation. And thank you, Anna, for moderating. And thank you, Dr. Jacobs. Great to see you.
Thank you all. Good night.